today we're going to be presenting on budgeting for results, a look at zero-based budgeting concepts. So as I said, I'm David Roberts, a partner with Mauldin and Jenkins, and I lead our government advisory services practice. I've got over 20 years experience in serving state, local, and federal governments across the country. And certainly one of the emerging trends pre-COVID has been the implementation of zero-based budgeting. And since COVID has had the impact that it has on our economy and budgets and operations, I've seen a significant uptick in governments leveraging ZBB principles and concepts, and we'll explore some of those thoughts today. Okay, so session objectives. Really, we have three. One is to introduce ZBB, or zero-based budgeting concepts and methods. Two, to discuss the benefits and application of zero-based budgeting. And three, to assess the budgeting impacts in today's COVID environment. So zero-based budgeting, hopefully many of you have at least heard of it. We're going to take a cursory dive into to understand what the concepts are and really what it's about and how it works. So zero-based budgeting, what is it and how does it work? Zero-based budgeting is the process of starting each budget cycle really with three key principles. One is with a zero base, which means you're going to be starting with a blank slate. You're not going to be leveraging your prior year's budget as a carry forward for a baseline to start. We're going to start with a blank piece of paper and build our budgets from scratch. Two, not carrying forward any prior year budget allocations. So what we did in the past is somewhat irrelevant, and we're going to have to justify the needs to continue either the same amount or a different amount forward into the next year's budget. And we're going to justify all budget allocations. I think this is a key component that it really forces the thought of rationalizing each expense, which may have been needed years ago and likely may have been carried over year, but the need may not be as prevalent now. And going through the process of rationalizing and justifying all allocations certainly gives the opportunity for that thought process to really weigh and decide if we need the expense or not. So how does it work? So ZBB, it ignores prior year budgets and starts with a clean slate. As I said, historic spends and budgets are largely irrelevant. It's a bottom-up approach to building the budget. Forces rationalization and justification of all expenses, which traditionally we really should be doing that whether we're using ZBB techniques or not. But I know far too often it's so easy to just roll budgets forward and not really take the time to or discernment to really analyze everything at the line item level. And also budgets can be increased or decreased. So ZBB, I think in its truest form is meant to help curb costs because we are having to justify and rationalize everything. But there are certain line items that as we go through the rationalization process and the need identification process, certainly line items can increase. So it's not just a total cost cutting exercise, and you can have line items both increase and decrease from year to year. So a little history about ZBB. It was really invented in the early 1900s. And it was made popular again by an accountant at Texas Instrument in the early 1970s. This accountant with Texas Instrument implemented ZBB techniques and helped save the company a significant amount of funds. The concept caught on and started to grow in popularity. Then Jimmy Carter, when he was governor in Georgia, he implemented ZBB for the state. And then he also implemented ZBB concepts when he was president with the federal government. ZBB was largely popular in the 70s and 80s and kind of had a spike at the time in terms of its popularity and usage. But I think over time, it was abandoned due to the amount of paperwork and data that it was needed to be effective. So ZBB, after the mid to late 80s, really certainly started to decline. Other budgeting methodologies started to become popular, such as performance-based budgeting. And really within the past several years, due to advances in data analytics and analytical tools, ZBB has been making a strong comeback. With ZBB, you can do it in many different formats, and you can leverage technology and data analysis to different extremes when implementing ZBB. But to really do it right and get the fullest benefit of ZBB, certainly leveraging data analytical tools is a key component. And with significant advancements in business intelligence tools, data analytical tools, that has created a surge in ZBB over the past several years. I personally have seen ZBB certainly be implemented within the past 7 to 5 years within Fortune 500 companies in the private sector. And I've seen within the past 3 years, ZBB really taking off within the public sector. I personally have implemented ZBB frameworks for multiple large cities and counties within the Southeast. And I'm certainly aware of many other states and larger localities that are looking at ZBB concepts now. So the case for zero-based budgeting. So the principles of ZBB are simply not leveraging the prior year budget as a baseline and providing justification for all expenses each budget cycle. The public expects government to ensure that their money is spent wisely and wants to better understand that expenditures are needed and how they benefit. And as as governments go through a ZBB process, they can communicate to the citizens, to the stakeholders, that we are being mindful of spend. We are, treating the taxpayer dollars wisely and frugally, and we are going through a rationalization and justification process for every budget line item that we go through. And I think that's something that proponents of ZBB and implementers of ZBB love to tout and state that to their stakeholders and citizens and demonstrate that they are formally going through this extra exercise or routine on an annual basis. And then I think obviously with personal spend, each of us, whether we know it or not, likely justifies, rationalizes, and prioritizes our spend, and we measure the benefit. Okay, let's see. What are the benefits of ZBB? So I think that there's a number of them. These are just some highlights. Certainly, ZBB requires critical thought at the line item level within each budget cycle. And as I said, if you just carry forward budgets from prior year, or have some mandate that will leverage last year's budget but maybe increase by 2% or decrease by 3%, what have you, we're not putting the critical thought, we're not having the justification or the rationalization at the line item level, and this forces us to do that. Involves more interaction among leadership, management, and staff. Certainly calls for more discussions, more workshops, and more critical thought in terms of not only guidance from management, but really the rationalization and justification thoughts coming from staff upward. Certainly encourages innovation. One of the things that we'll talk about with ZBB is looking at alternative analysis. Are there alternatives we can leverage to obtain the same end result? And with that alternative analysis, certainly plays a role, or innovation plays a role in terms of how we obtain those identical results, but potentially with different workflows or different methods, and certainly different costs. ZBB encourages cost effectiveness and efficiency. As we're again going through the rationalization phase, we have the mindset of not only being as frugal as we can, but we really have to demonstrate why this expense is needed, what the expected benefit will be, and why it's important to include. Encourages the elimination or reduction of outdated or non-value added expenditure. I think this is Exactly right. When I gave a prior example of how expenses may be needed at one point in time, and there's a rationalization and it gets approved, maybe that happened years ago. And if your organization is leveraging a carry forward type of budget approach, which largely is based on the prior year budget, a lot of those expenses tend to just roll forward, and they may or may not be needed this year. They may or may not be the most effective way of procuring the end result that you're looking for. So it certainly does encourage elimination of outdated or non-value added expenditures. And over time, I think this is what's really important, and what I really like about ZBB is that over time it establishes baseline costs and service level expectations. So for each organizational unit that you have, you're able to understand what type of service you want to provide to your customers, and what that corresponding cost is. So as you kind of pull different levers, and as the budget allows, you may want to enhance customer service or service expectations, and you will better understand the required cost to do that. So it really does, leveraging ZBB, help you to prioritize what your budget's going to be, obviously what your expenditures are, and what the anticipated results are going to be. And then once you decide your service levels, you can again pull the different levers to figure out exactly the corresponding costs that align to your expected service level expectations. Okay, so I mentioned that ZBB is certainly been very popular over the past 7 years, and specifically the past 3 within government. I think obviously due to the impacts of COVID, certainly governments have felt tremendous budget pressures and budget reductions. Of course, obviously private sector has as well. There was a recent Gartner survey that came out in September of 2020, so very, very recent, and they surveyed global finance leaders from obviously across the world, leading organizations, and 26% reported that they are going to be leveraging ZBB techniques for their next budget cycle. So this is important. I mean, almost just over a quarter of all the folks surveyed in terms of global finance leaders are leveraging some sort of ZBB technique. And I think that in this environment where cost containment, cost cutting certainly is extremely important, ZBB is a prime tool and technique to help with that. So a couple of thoughts from respected organizations, McKinsey and Forbes. So McKinsey states that ZBB brings remarkable spending visibility, helps achieve relentless cost discipline, encourages managers to reallocate resources in an agile fashion, and unleashes a culture of continuous improvement. I couldn't agree more. I think that the culture of continuous improvement is really strong, especially as you are going through ZBB year after year. And not only is this an annual exercise, you are monitoring your results throughout the year. So the budget cycle, in essence, as we know, never ends. There certainly are different milestones and steps, but we're continuously monitoring it. We're establishing KPIs, key performance indicators, so that we can measure the results of our budget and its effectiveness. And again, it certainly creates a culture of continuous improvement. Forbes states that while cost cutting has a role to play, ZBB's real aim is to make thoughtful spending decisions. Reframing choices as cost management. The small changes that result have the cumulative effect of creating investment opportunities to drive growth. I completely agree with that as well. So certainly, Forbes recognizes that cost cutting is a role in ZBB's methodology, but as they point out, the real aim is to make thoughtful spending decisions, and I certainly agree with that. Again, as we go through the rationalization and justification stage, we are being thoughtful about our spend. Is this expenditure or line item, is it needed? If it is, are there other ways to procure it and get the same end result that we're looking for? So again, a lot of critical thought is required when leveraging ZBB. Okay, so this slide shows a comparison of traditional budgeting frameworks to zero-based budgeting frameworks. So with traditional budget models, this is traditional budgeting models not leveraging a performance-based budgeting technique, not leveraging a ZBB budget technique. So this is kind of a generalization, but certainly a fair representation. So typically, organizations start with the prior year budget. There's limited correlation to strategic initiatives, priorities, or goals. And I think that's something that I certainly have seen over my career in a lot of organizations, where organizations will have strategic plans, strategic goals, visions, objectives, things of that nature, but they really stop at the enterprise level. They may go down to the department level, but it's rare to see those visions, those goals, objectives driven down to the budget level. In my opinion, that's where you have the greatest results, and that's where you really have the best opportunity to measure your effectiveness and to again be able to demonstrate how your spending is directly correlated or aligned to your strategic or enterprise goals. Limited data analysis, measuring results or outcomes without the use of KPIs, key performance indicators, or other type of budget measurements. Really, there's not a clear way to determine whether our spend is worth it or not, or whether we're getting the anticipated outcomes, or whether we even have anticipated outcomes. Limited demonstration of funding allocation to results or outcomes. Again, very hard to, in a traditional budget framework, demonstrate how our funding decisions correlate to various outcomes. And fewer incentives to provide efficiency and effectiveness, not going through the rationalization, not going through the justification. Things are being carried forward. We've always had this line item for years. It gets approved every year. The incentive certainly isn't there for innovation or for savings that could be redirected for growth and innovation in other areas. So we'll compare the traditional budget model, with the sample zero-based budget model. So with the ZBB technique, your organization starts with a blank slate. It starts with a clean sheet of paper. Departments and programs have to identify their essential services and activities. So what is it that we're doing? What's our core functions, and are these essential to our government's mission? Then once we've identified the essential services, we have to rationalize and justify them. Why are we doing these services? Are they required? Is there a federal mandate? Is this a function that helps our economy grow and helps our community thrive? Are there public safety issues? So why are we doing everything that we're doing? And basically kind of proving a proof of concept to why we're providing those services. Then once we've identified and agreed upon the essential services and activities, we do alternative analysis. And that's looking at different service delivery models, associated costs and results. So are there ways that we can achieve the same result by doing something different? And maybe it's different workflows, maybe it's outsourcing certain services versus doing it internally. But how can we get the same results or meet our objectives through different delivery models? And what are the associated costs? What are the pros and cons? And which one is right for our organization? Increased importance on data analysis while establishing the budget, but also throughout the budget life cycle. So certainly we're monitoring the budget within ZBB framework. We're looking at spend consistently. We are looking at what are the results that we expected to see? What are the results that we're actually seeing? And do we want to change things? Are there certain line items that midstream we need to increase or decrease or shift to further get the results that we're looking for? There certainly is a direct correlation when you do ZBB between spend and results. We can, when done right, we learn, okay, $1 here will give me this benefit, and $1 taken away here will have this action. So it allows us to anticipate the benefits that we're looking for, as well as potentially some of the negative consequences that happen when we reduce budgets. Enhanced accountability and transparency. As ZBB, there's a lot more thought processes. There's a lot more, many stakeholders that are involved, and people are much more involved in the budget process than in a ZBB format compared to a traditional budget model, and which certainly drives to helping increase accountability and transparency. And it creates an environment encouraging innovation and positive results. Good behavior, good savings, innovative ideas certainly should be rewarded, and ZBB certainly provides a platform for that. Okay, so we have an example of a conceptual ZBB model. And here, this is an example just for a typical government, and just using fleet management as the example here. So going through a ZBB process just for fleet management, we'll walk through kind of one workflow or one process flow that you would go through for ZBB. Obviously, this would be applied to really all services and all line items within fleet management, and then that would also the same techniques would apply to all departments within the organization. So using fleet management as an example, fleet management defines its critical services, and they may have 2, they may have 5, they may have 10, but the organization has defined these are the critical functions that fleet management's going to provide. Leadership signs off and says, yes, we agree, those are all critical services that we must provide, and we want to continue providing them. As an example, a single identified critical service is fleet maintenance. So now we've identified our critical service, and now we move to the alternative analysis phase. So, okay, so looking at fleet maintenance, the fleet management organization researches alternatives, and they come up with 3 different methods or service delivery models for providing fleet maintenance. One would be to outsource. They could outsource the fleet maintenance to a private sector company or companies, and not maintain any repairs, any personnel related to repairs, any garages, any tools, supplies, and get rid of all those costs and not maintain any of those costs internally, and just leverage the private sector in an outsource model. Option 2 could be to provide internally. So establishing garages, mechanics, tools, supplies, all the above. And maybe you already have this, and even if you already have your infrastructure to provide the fleet maintenance internally, every year you still would go through this alternative research to see, does it still make sense to do it internally, or should we do something different? And at the end of the day, you'll prove your proof of concept to determine for our organization what's the method that gives us the best benefits. We certainly can look at costs, but obviously there's other non-cost factors that could be benefits as well. And then the third option that was identified is to collaborate with other governments. So maybe there's some type of shared service model that could work. Maybe there's other jurisdictions that are nearby where they already have the infrastructure set up. Maybe we can take our fleets to them and have a intergovernmental or intragovernmental cooperative agreement where other governments are providing the service for us. Maybe it's a joint effort where we collectively collaborate and build the infrastructure with a neighboring government or governments, and we share the expenses of the garages and tools, etc., and then come up with a method to allocate back evenly. So all three of those alternative analysis would be looked at, and cost would certainly be a factor. Other benefits would be looked at in terms of locations, convenience to the mechanics, locations throughout the jurisdictions, costs, all the above. And the organization would determine its best fit. So the lowest cost may or may not be the best fit for your organization. Once you determine your service delivery model in terms of either outsource, providing it internally, or collaborating with other governments, you will then determine your budget based on service levels. So what are the number of vehicles that we have in our fleet? How often do we want to maintain them? Do we want to maintain them according to manufacturer's recommendation? Or do we want to do it maybe a little bit better in hopes that they'll have a longer life? Or do we want to let it slip a little bit? Maybe costs are tight and we'll extend and only do critical maintenance or preventative maintenance in a less desired time frame. So we'll determine what service levels we want and how many vehicles we will service. And from that, we would determine the budget for fleet maintenance. And then obviously on an annual basis, we would monitor performance. We would set up key performance indicators to measure results, and we would continuously monitor to see how the results compare to our expectations. All right, so my own personal ZBB story. So as I've said, I've helped implement ZBB at a number of clients, and I knew I was going to get asked at some point in time, what I thought about it and have I leveraged ZBB personally. So proactively, when I was doing my first project, decided that my wife and I would go through our own ZBB exercise. So obviously, we have a budget that we keep every 2 weeks, and we leveraged some of the ZBB concepts. And what we found was certainly interesting. So I'll share a couple of the outputs from that. One, haircuts. I certainly had budgeted X amount of dollars for haircuts. I'm getting a little bit older. My hair is thinning, so I don't get haircuts as often as I used to. I used to get them pretty regularly. Now it's every 3 or 4 weeks. And what I found was that I was underspending in my line item or budget for haircuts. So going through this exercise over time, I realized that my behavior has changed. I have reduced the frequency or need for my haircuts, and therefore I was, without even realizing it, just carrying over my haircut budget. I'm sure I spent it in other areas, but this helped me to reduce that and really kind of have a truer budget appreciation for haircuts. Next item is looking at cable TV. My wife and I, and we have two kids as well, have a number of TVs, and our cable bill was just extremely high. It was around $250. That included internet as well, but we thought that was just way too much for what we were getting and the benefit that TV brought us. So we did alternative analysis. We looked at what's important to us, what are other ways that we can watch TV, do we even need cable? We decided that we needed more than just kind of a HD antenna or basic channels, but we didn't need all the channels that we were getting. And so we looked to different online subscription services, and we found a package that was perfect for us. Gives us almost all the channels that we wanted, and the price is $50 a month. And so I still have the same cable carrier for internet of $100, so it resulted in a net savings of $100 a month. So we went through the process of benefits and rationalizing. Do we need this? Is it worth $250 a month? What's it worth to us? And going through alternative analysis, and resulted in $100 a month savings. Groceries, especially with COVID going on, and I have 2 boys that are certainly aging and eating more than they used to. Our grocery bill was certainly has increased a lot. we're home a lot more. We're not eating out as much, and our groceries, we were underestimating our spend. And so we reallocated and recalibrated our budget and aligned it to where it needed to be. So this was an example of how a line item actually increased, and just because it wasn't realistic. And obviously we were taking the money from elsewhere, from savings, to make up for that difference without realizing it each month. And last example, if you have kids, you may be familiar with this. It's a logo for abcmouse.com. My youngest is now 8 and hasn't used abcmouse.com in a number of years. We got it for him probably when he was 3, signed up. I think it's a monthly subscription, maybe $5.99. Auto renews, of course, and you have to call to cancel it. It was going to, I think, maybe one of our primary debit cards, and just $5.99. I didn't really notice it or pay much attention to it, buried in all the other expenses. And so this was something that we had been paying for month over month for multiple years with no benefit. And obviously, when we went through ZBB, we had to rationalize everything, look at all of our expenses, and we looked and we found that this was a recurring expense that certainly was not needed. And I think that's a great example of eliminating waste, or eliminating things that may have been needed at one point in time that often get carried forward in budgets. So that's my own personal ZBB experience. I certainly invite you all to try it as well. I think it can certainly be fruitful. All right, so implementation thoughts. Really, implementation can take a while. You can do it in a phased approach with certain departments. You could do a big bang approach where you're doing all departments at once. I will tell you, I think, or I truly believe that you certainly can start it and get benefits in year one. However, it's going to take a couple years as you go through the ZBB process to truly leverage the data analytical tools, come up with more robust ways and more formal ways to do your justification, as well as your rationalization and your alternative analysis. So it's something that's a growing concept, and I think the benefits just compound against each other and grow from year to year. So in order to implement it right, you certainly need strong buy-in and commitment from leadership. I'm a big believer in doing business cases, so explaining why we're implementing ZBB, what our goals are, and what the rationale is for why we're doing it. As I said, full implementation and maturity could take multiple budget cycles. Really, I'm a big believer in change management. Need to place time and resources for effective change management, and ensure that people have the proper training, the proper job aids, understand why we're doing it, and can move forward effectively. Create a task force to help with the implementation. Everybody in your organization has a day job. They really can't help implement ZBB part-time. You certainly need dedicated resources, either internally or externally, to help. As I said, consider a pilot agency or a phased approach rather than the big bang. You certainly cannot over communicate. There's no such thing when coming to ZBB implementation, or really any implementation of significant transformation. And show some quick wins. Demonstrate to your stakeholders why we're doing this, why this is a good thing, and what the positive results are. Thoughts. So really, as I said, there certainly are a number of budget methodologies or frameworks out there. I think no matter whether you use ZBB or something else, I would certainly hope that to some degree everyone is leveraging some of these principles related to the budget process. Show justification for the expenses, hold budget owners accountable, be transparent internally and to the public, contain an understanding of cost and service delivery. I think that's critical for every organization to understand what it's costing to provide the services that they are. Contain defined service level or performance expectations. Provide a correlation between spend and results or outcome. Leverage data analytics throughout the budget life cycle. Provide continuous monitoring, assessment, reporting, and maintain formal governance. So certainly need proper policies and procedures, decision-making, authorities, roles and responsibilities when going throughout the budget process. So just a couple more slides, and then we'll wrap up. Want to address budget and operational impacts in a COVID-19 environment. Certainly not telling anybody anything that they don't know already. Obviously, there's significant revenue shortfalls, increased volatility, need for cost containment and deferment, changes in the workforce, delivery model changes, need to reforecast, update financials, certainly are all impacts. And I certainly believe that COVID-19 is going to have a permanent effect on operations. The way that governments do business is going to be changed, and I believe forever changed. That there'll be maybe some positive things that we learn, but certainly also some things that we're going to have to cut as well, that will change our model going forward. And obviously, all these have a direct impact on the budget and budget management process. Just a couple of statistics here. So due to COVID-19 budget woes, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that state and localities has already laid off 1.5 million workers. I would expect that number unfortunately continues to rise. National League of Cities reported last month that more than 700 cities have halted plans to improve roadways, buy new equipment. So major, they're halting major capital improvement or infrastructure projects. And nearly 90% of cities across the country anticipate a revenue shortfall before the end of the calendar year. That was as of April. Now, obviously, several months later, I would certainly expect that 90% number to be much, much higher and closer to 100. This chart shows some prior recessions and the rebound time for general funds in city governments across America. So the recession of 1990 took about 5 years for the general funds to be replenished. 2001, 6 years. Great Recession, 2007, almost 12 years. And I think that, industry experts, economists are certainly comparing the COVID-19 environment, to equal or greater than the impacts and effects of the Great Recession. So who knows how long it will take, but if, history is somewhat correct in predicting the future, it's certainly going to be, more than 10 years before city budgets and general funds get replenished. So knowing all that, I think it's incredibly important for governments now to establish a budget-conscious culture. Certainly need to set up a culture of frugality. Everybody understanding that every dollar counts, expenditures and revenues, and everybody has to do what they can to really save and contain costs. Leaders need to show this and show that there's proper tone from the top, and lead by example, and that nobody is safe from making the cost containment or some of the hard cost-cutting decisions. During the 2007 Great Recession, I thought this a little humorous. The mayor of one city went so far as to start mowing the grass in front of City Hall himself to cut back on contracted maintenance costs. Did the mayor do it to save a couple bucks, or did he do it to really show the citizens that that they were serious about cost containment within the organization and were really leaving no stone unturned? And maybe it's a combination of the both, but I think that all organizations really now more than ever have to leave no stone unturned and look for ways to reduce spend. But I think need to agree to look at all programs and areas for cost savings. Nothing is off the table. Delay or cancel non-critical projects, purchases, or contracts. If there was something that leadership was enthusiastic about it, and they decide to cancel it because it doesn't make sense now, I think that sends even a more powerful message to the rest of the organization. Certainly, delay or cancel low priority programs. Cut back on office equipment especially the things that may be seen as perks, like desktop printers, and don't exempt leadership from these frugalities. Again, setting a clear direction and tone at the top certainly helps create a budget conscious culture throughout. And acknowledge and celebrate ways for people, especially frontline workers, that come up with innovative ideas of how to save and contain costs. We want to encourage that environment of innovation and certainly reward those that are thinking outside the box and finding constructive ways to obtain the same output at a cheaper, reduced rate. So again, whether you're implementing a budget framework or if you're implementing just a budget conscious culture, again, I think that these are strategies that always should be leveraged. Define the need and business case for change, hold people accountable, track the results, get some quick wins, be able to show, some of the low hanging fruit of why you're doing this and some of the positive benefits that have already been achieved. Over communicate, definitely use change management, and identify project champions throughout the organization that will help with change management and help others come on board. So in closing, ZBB can absolutely be used as a catalyst for change. And I think that in today's environment, some folks would say never let a crisis go to waste. This could be, and unfortunately is, an opportunity where we're having to take on costs that were maybe otherwise off limits, or things that have been carried over for the future, or pet projects. Really, nothing is off limits in today's environment. And I think that now is the opportunity to really justify and rationalize our spend in all areas, and certainly make tough cuts where needed. And I think that government officials need to float big ideas in a time of crisis. Incremental adjustments will most likely not be enough. That's very, very true. The deficits and revenue shortfalls that governments are seeing across the country are very significant, and we need to think of how we can transform through innovation and different ideas on a significant and large stage and level. Incremental adjustments, minor savings, things that maybe have been done in year to year, where you have to reduce spend by a couple of percentage points. Those things aren't going to work here. We really need to think outside the box, look at our delivery models, and find ways that we can deliver through innovation, technology, perhaps, but alternative arrangements to continue to deliver our important services. So, as I said, ZBB certainly can be a catalyst for that change. It's becoming extremely popular in today's environment. I hope this presentation has been beneficial. Hopefully, most of you have at least heard of ZBB in the past, and now you have a little bit more understanding. My contact information is certainly on the presentation. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and if I can answer any questions or any follow-ups, please don't hesitate to call me or email me. Thank you so much. Goodbye.